Welcome to the SBI podcast. You are joining the most watched and listened to show dedicated to B2B revenue growth. My name is Melissa Valdez, the Director of Client Engagement for SBI. Our guest today is Walt Magura, Vice President of Emerging Industry Segments and Channels for Ericsson. Walt is here to share his experience in creating new beachheads in verticals that provide future long-term growth to Ericsson. Enjoy the show. From SBI's Executive Briefing Center in Dallas, Texas, the most watched and listened to content in B2B sales and marketing, it's the SBI Podcast with your host, Matt Shares.
Welcome to the SBI Podcast, a weekly show dedicated to helping you make your number. Today, we're going to demonstrate how to ensure you have the right sales strategy and the right talent to enter new markets. So, why is this topic important? To grow revenue, companies are moving into adjacent spaces, they're moving into new markets. Assumptions that get made during the planning process make or break the success of the entry into these new markets. The selling motion that's worked so beautifully for you in other markets may not be that works in the new markets. And so it goes. My name is Matt Shares. I'm the CEO of SBI, and I'm also your host. Joining me in the studio, as always, is my beloved co-host, Melissa Valdez. And Melissa's here. She's going to point you to resources that are going to advance you along the way to making your number. Welcome, Melissa.
Thank you, Matt, and welcome to our listeners and viewers.
So joining me in the studio, longtime friend, is Walt Magura. And Walt is the Vice President of Emerging Industry Segments and Channels for Ericsson. He has a long title, so it must mean, Walt, that you have a lot to share, because title length is related to insight. In the room right now, I have the Archimedes of sales excellence. So this is going to be good. All kidding aside, Walt is I've known Walt for a long time, and he's done some amazing things in his career. So I'm thrilled that you could join us, thrilled you can come in person, hang out with us in the studio. Yes. So maybe, Walt, just introduce yourself, Ericsson, and what you do to the audience, and then we'll jump into the interview.
Okay, sure. So I'll start with the company because, as you know, Ericsson is a publicly traded company. Yep. It's a $24 billion global multinational company whose primary focus is telecom. So as a 140-year-old company, we have developed ways of working that are tried and true, that are in cement, and that have worked very, very well for us in our primary focused vertical. And so my role is really to help us move into new areas. Yeah. And so taking all that we've done in the past and trying to make it work in the future.
Yep, very good. And then, Walt, prior to that, talk a little bit about your career, where you spent some time, where you, quote, grew up that, qualified you for a role of such strategic importance.
What made me a little different is the fact that I have both telecom experience and enterprise experience. Yeah. And ultimately, Ericsson is trying to move into the enterprise. Yep. So my background with companies like AMX, companies like Intervoice, companies like with EMC and Comdisco fit very nicely, as well as my background with Nortel, which is also a telecom company. So that blend made me a unique character, if you will, to sort of fit the role.
Well, you had the ability to kind of point the course of what new should look like, but you also could understand where Ericsson was coming from.
Yes.
All right, very good. So, Melissa, our audience and our viewers might want to follow along as Walt and I dive into the interview. So can you share with them how they can do that?
Yes, I can do that, Matt. For those of you listening and watching, I hope that you have your 2018 How to Make Your Number workbook handy. If you don't have that, listen to this message, push pause, and go get it. You can find it at sbi.tips/2018 workbook. I'll wait for you to come back. And you'll turn to the sales strategy section, the people planning phase, on page 367.
All right, so let's jump into the questions. In this first segment, Walt and I are going to demonstrate how to ensure you have the right sales strategy and the right people strategy to enter new markets. So, Walt, metaphorically speaking, you walk in, it's day one. Share with the audience what you faced as you sort of assessed the situation.
So at a high level, this is a company that's been working in a very specific way in a very defined market. Yeah. So Ericsson is a telecom-oriented company, and if you think about it, there's probably 25 or 30 companies globally that support that industry, that actually deliver that service when you think about voice and data.
Yeah.
What we started to look at was the notion of the Internet of Things and how to help enable connectivity and then the associated stack on top of that to other industries. And so the thinking was that we would look at adjacent industries where communication infrastructure could be readily leveraged in the transformation of their businesses.
Yep.
And we ended up looking at 3 verticals primarily: energy and utility,
Yep.
transportation, and there's a couple sub-verticals there, and then governments.
Okay.
And the U.S. government in particular on the military side. So we needed to think about how we could take the solutions that we've used in the telecom space and then apply them into these new verticals.
Yep. So, Walt, knowing that energy and transportation are not created equal,
Right.
you're going through this transformation, then you've got to have sort of sub-strategies relative to the strategy to enter new markets.
That's right.
How did you unpack and how did you think about the allocation of people, money, and time, knowing that those are very distinct verticals?
So we looked at the drivers that were pushing those industries. So I'll give you an example. In the utility energy industry, utility space, that model is going through a major disruption. So what was once a centralized sort of distributed model became a decentralized two-way model with solar and wind energy. So it was changing how that business was going to look in the years ahead.
Yep.
The infrastructure that supported it
Yep.
was monolithic, was inflexible, and needed to change.
Yep.
So we said, okay, we have technology to help make that position go from A to B.
Yep.
In transportation, I'll give you an example, Tesla,
Yep.
right? They were changing the automotive industry. And one way is with software updates. Think about recalls,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Think
yeah.
about things that need to be changed inside an automobile. Today, Tesla delivers those updates over the air. The traditional manufacturers do not. So how do we enable that?
Okay. Did you, and then I guess validating market opportunity and sort of putting your hands around the size of the prize to say, we're going to go to market with channel partners. We're going to go to market direct. The marketing motion that we need with energy versus transportation, like how did you determine an effectiveness strategy, an efficiency strategy, direct, indirect? Because if I'm listening to this, I'm saying, God, that sounds like this overarching thing to try to figure out.
Yes.
How do I get this down to what do I do on Monday?
Right. It's a great question. So from an efficiency and effectiveness standpoint,
Yep.
Ericsson's a very unique company. We are very focused on driving profit.
Yep.
So as we think about going into new markets, the ability to sort of say we're going to take it on the chin to sort of gain share,
No muss.
unacceptable. Publicly traded company, you will be efficient, but you need to
That's
be
right.
effective.
That's right. You can take your time as long as you do it quickly.
So what we did is we actually did a bit of a hybrid. So we looked at value and we said, how can we help enable these companies to make this position? And when you look at the changes that they had to go through
Yep.
and what it would take for them to do it, there was really significant value to be captured. So we did a targeted approach. So I'll give you an example. In the automotive industry, we picked the 2 guys up in Detroit,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
We started working with them directly. In the utility space, we picked large players, companies like Con Ed, companies like
Yeah.
Duke, right? And in the latter instance, those companies have to go through a regulatory process so you understand what they're going to be acquiring, right?
Yep.
It's well in advance
Yep.
so that you could tailor your solution to meet that need,
Yep.
which is what we did.
Yep. So, Walt, as you and I wrap up this first segment, I mean, it seemed to me like instead of you trying to do a lot and cover a lot of the market, you actually went the other way.
Yes.
You looked at an existing customer and you looked at a partnership and you said, we want to be in a new market. We've got new technology and a new place to create enterprise value for our customer and for us. We're going to go with them because based on your enterprise model and your enterprise experience, you were able to recognize as a route to market, that was the way you were going to enter the market.
Yes, it was a very targeted approach. We looked at the assets that we thought could be readily transferable,
Yep.
value that could be realized,
Yep.
and we focused on bringing people in that had the right types of relationships
Yeah.
and background, which I know we'll get into in a minute.
Yep.
But that helped accelerate the process.
Yeah.
Those cycles are very long, and so you had to be very smart about what you did and why you did it.
Yep.
And we did a blend of what I would call product, services, and solutions. And in some cases, we used services
Yeah.
as a kind of a wedge to
Yeah,
get
as a
in
wedge, yeah.
because the product sale was longer. So it was a combination,
Yeah.
right? We were selective.
All right, very good. So Walt and I are going to take a quick break from the interview. And Melissa's going to share a tool that you can leverage, and then Walt and I are going to jump back into the second segment in a little bit.
Yes, I'm very excited to share this tool with our audience. If you are wondering how you're going to make your number this year, well, SBI has the tool for you. It's a web-based self-assessment that allows you to evaluate your go-to-market strategy against the emerging best practices of market leaders. To get this fantastic tool, you will go to sbi.tips/revenue growth diagnostic.
You're listening to the SBI podcast. I'm Matt Shares. I'm your host, and today's guest is Walt Magura, and Walt's the VP of Emerging Industry Segments and Channels for Ericsson. So what Walt and I are talking about today is, as you think about entering new markets, how do you ensure you have the right sales strategy and the right talent? The first segment, Walt broke down and he made something complex really simple. He did that incredibly well. How they thought about the strategy and what the entry point was in the route to market. Now we're going to jump in, we're going to talk a little bit about people. So Walt, how did you assess the talent needs for Ericsson and what you needed based on the strategy that you were deploying?
So it's a fairly complex, believe it or not, issue for Ericsson, because Ericsson as a company has a very structured way of how we look at talent. Our solutions tend to be very complex, so we have a strong technical engineering bend. Because we have long historical relationships with our customers, we tend to have more of a farmer mentality versus a hunter mentality. So stepping back and looking at moving into new markets, I needed to find a blend that would allow us to have folks that could be technically astute, but vertically oriented and know the language and have the credibility to help take what we thought was a good message and a good capability into those targeted accounts in a way that would work.
Did you go role first or person first? And for the audience, I know Walt's got an answer for this. Oftentimes the mistake that I see is when people are either launching a new product, going to a new vertical, moving into a new geo, they look at the current organization and they say, oh, Walt's a good guy, he's a good salesperson, he can do that, as opposed to looking at the geo, the industry, the product, looking at how that target customer is going to buy it, what's required at the moments of truth to do that, what are those skills objectively on a piece of paper, and then getting the talent to match the skills. So when I talk about skills orientation before the person orientation, Walt, a mistake that I've seen for the decade I've been doing this is we all fall in love with good guy, good girl mentality of people who have been in the company for a long time, as opposed to the objectivity of what's required. How did you answer that question?
Well, first of all, that question was absolutely upfront and very present. So the company believes, and again, it's a bit of a cultural thing, that you take the people that you have and you sort of put them into new opportunities. And in a traditional model with a traditional customer set, that might work. But to your point, it's actually the wrong answer. So there was a lot of inertia that had to be overcome in order to say, I hear you, but we need to try something different. And so what I really did was look at the verticals and looked for leaders. So I started with a leadership position and found leaders that had the experience in the vertical, had the technical competence to be able to understand what our suite of solutions would look like, and then put them in a position to hire people. Ultimately, I had 3 leaders. I took 2 from the outside, 1 from the inside. And that was, in all honesty, a way to sort of work in the organization and not be too foreign of a person, in the sense that, I'm outside what we traditionally do. I had to kind of blend it together.
Well, it had to be the context of culture and what Ericsson, the company, was willing to accept. No matter who it is, they have to be culturally compatible. And culture will trump strategy 7 out of 7 days.
Completely agree.
So you got clarity around your vertical leader, you got clarity around technical competence, then how did you think about assessing that talent along the way to say, am I getting the outcomes that I want from this talent, 1? How does that inform the talent I'm hiring in behind it, number 2? And sort of what's that performance management, hey, you can play but you can't play here? How did you think through that?
It was a bit of a gauntlet, to be honest. again, as a publicly traded company, looking at new markets in what I would call a more mature sort of lens, really driven by net sales and margin contribution, it proved a bit challenging. So it's, first of all, managing expectations back up and setting the right targets. And then secondly, working with the leaders to look at the metrics as we're working through the year in terms of achieving those targets. We did things like looking at funnel, development of funnel, the size of the funnel. We looked at close rate. But the complexity of some of these transactions in terms of the time it takes, given the almost a quarterly pressure, it made it very, very difficult.
Yeah. Well, do you have, like, when you think about the task of hiring people and getting that right, but then adjusting the talent profile as the business changes?
Yes.
If you look back, and you were like restarting it, or for the people listening and watching the show right now, do you have one or two, nuggets of advice that have served you well over your career?
Well, the first is, I think you come with a plan, and the pressure, at least in the public domain, is to execute in a very, very rapid time frame. And the pressure that you have is to, if it's not working, change it. And I firmly believe, and my experience indicates, that you need to give it time to germinate, to actually grow. So if the expectation from a mature business is you'll get results in 3, 6, 9 months, but you're moving into a new market, that's unrealistic. And so you have to stick to your guns. You've got to be committed to sort of make that work and defend it the best way you can, given the information that you have. So. In this case, that's what I did, and lots of pressure. The company was going through transformation in terms of how our core business was behaving and was actually, condensing a little bit. So just stick to your guns.
Yeah, but I think the key there, Walt, is the situational context that you talked about. What I often see is, if you kind of think about bell curves, right?
Yes.
Industries have a bell curve, right? Growth, maturity, decline.
Yes.
Products.
Yes.
Right? Competition and the company and kind of where they are.
Yes.
So does talent. So being able to match talent life cycle of where do I need a 42-year-old, 20-year, still up and comer? Or do I need a 54-year-old, mature, what's required, and matching those life cycle bell curves is something that I don't see an awful lot of folks thinking through, because sometimes what you need to enter a new market, evangelizer, biz dev, front end person, very, very different than running an efficiency play right, in a mature market.
Yeah, so in that, you're 100% correct. And I think from a profile standpoint, I was more focused on what I'd say the business developer or hunter sort of mindset is, both from a leadership and from an actual account person. But strong pressure to have a blend. In other words, you have to leverage some Ericsson folks, which in hindsight I actually think was good. And the reason is because of culture, because of ways of working, and because of how our systems are developed to work in a certain market. It's almost like you needed a decoder ring to effectively leverage the assets, to take them and put them in the market and gain the maximum value. So I focused on the hunter type, the up and comer type. There was a little cultural friction because the culture is literally almost 180 degrees. But in the context of the structure we were in, we were able to navigate that. Had good leadership support, which I think is another dimension of this.
So as Walt and I head into another break, a takeaway for you as you think about talent and as you're standing in an airport line right now listening to this, or you are on your commute into work, or you're on the train, is clarity of a scorecard. And the scorecard says down the vertical, you've got your competencies, things like strategic agility, things like persuasive capability, things like problem solving that you're hiring to. And there should be an A-player answer for every question you ask in an interview process. There's a B answer and there's a C answer. As you hire folks, your entire team should be focused on listening for the A-player answer instead of judging the eloquence through which a person answers a question. If you don't know the answers your team is looking for, it's impossible to hire on spec. So one of the things that Walt was able to do is define that scorecard, accountabilities and competencies. And when you do that, you improve your chances. Hiring still is a 50-50 coin flip at best, but at least you take some of the risk out of the system. So with that, we're going to take another break. and Melissa's going to share with you a resource to help you make your number.
Yes, so for those of you who are watching or listening and you could benefit from Walt's emerging best practices in terms of talent or entering new markets, you don't have to go at it alone. We here at SBI are happy to help you. I highly recommend considering an interactive workshop with one of our subject matter experts. To get a feel for what's covered in these workshops, get out your trusty Make Your Workbook, How to Make Your Number workbook. You can find that workbook at sbi.tips/2018 workbook.
All right, welcome back, SBI community. We are here with Walt Magura, VP of Emerging Industry Segments and Channels for Ericsson. Walt and I are going to jump into our last segment, and we're going to talk a little bit about the strategy that he took when he jumped into this new market. So, Walt, we often talk about at SBI that sales excellence and revenue growth is 50% talent, which you and I just spent some time talking about, and it's 50% performance conditions. Things like what accounts, things like am I getting leads, how do I set up territories, comp plans, all the stuff to enable this talent. So you walk in, you're thinking about account strategy. How did you size the market to get the level of clarity that you got, knowing how to enter it?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we took a very targeted approach, right? So we weren't going on a broad-based market. We were very targeted in terms of accounts. And those accounts have, depending on account, have some history and some public information that gives you insight into what the size of the opportunity is. So really, it was a combination of that data combined with the background of the individual that was working in that area, and it could be a history in terms of their own relationships, how we could shorten that cycle, because in some cases these are very, very long cycles. So having someone that understood the landscape and had the right demeanor and technical competence to insert themselves and take get ahead of the competition already in process was kind of critical. So that's kind of what we were doing.
Did you find that, so you had the accounts, but relative to the buyers?
Yes.
And how the buyers would buy, did you find that influenced or changed, and did you have the need to create new positions that didn't exist in Ericsson in the past?
No. So Ericsson actually, we're very fortunate. So as a large multinational company and working with some of these companies in these verticals, like a utility company, they tend to be very risk adverse. So our size and scale and our history, so I'll give you an example. It's public information, we managed Sprint's network for years. So we have a massive field force, we have all kinds of systems and support, and we're used to working in very complex environments. So if we show up at Duke, as an example, and we talk about how we can minimize risk and help them improve their time to market as they transition their business, it's a good value. It's a good resounding value prop. And so we target very senior levels, and then we obviously work from a technical perspective at the operational level, and we come at it that way.
What role did marketing play as you guys made your entry? And if you're smiling right now, what?
I smile because I feel bad because Ericsson. So
don't feel bad, man. You're in the trust tree.
The Ericsson. So Ericsson has a 100 plus year relationship with these companies. We don't do marketing. We really don't. We do one marketing event, which is really called Mobile World Congress, which is a trade show in Barcelona every year where all the top telecom companies go, and they talk about what's going on. And our conference booth is literally 3 football fields square. And so we bring people in and we take care of them. So marketing, from entering a new market, it was very, very challenging. How do you create awareness? So if you were to Google, as a matter of fact, it was mentioned the other day at the workshop, Google Ericsson, phones come up. We haven't been in the phone business in 8 years. So it's a bit of a gap. So we were challenged, I guess is what I would say. And that was another driver for using what I'd call sort of a pointed or targeted strategy, because I couldn't rely on sort of a digital capability to help build awareness. We had to do it literally one by one.
So, but Walt, the great thing about what you just said, and for the viewers and the listeners, Walt recognized the context in which he was entering the new market. You just heard him say that I knew I wasn't going to be able to do what, on a best practice perspective, I wanted to do digitally. So You were willing to live with that. You made a trade-off and you said, because of that, I'm going targeted. I'm picking these customers. I'm hiring a salesperson, vertical leaders who have this background, and it's going to be the ground game.
Yes.
It's going to be one-to-one.
Yes.
But Walt, the beautiful thing with that is it's clarity. It doesn't, like, there's different ways to enter the new market,
Yes.
but what I like about that and what people should take from it is its clarity, and it was contextual to the circumstances that you had. So I full applause from my perspective around that. So looking back now, how do you think about if there were 2 or 3 big learnings and you were sharing them with the audience as people are listening to you going, wow, how am I thinking about entering new markets? How am I thinking about the products inside those markets? And how am I thinking about my commercial strategy? What would you share?
I think you made a point earlier, so I want to jump on that for a second. Culture is important.
Yeah.
So as you're in the organization that you're in, you have to understand the context of who you are as a company and how you work.
Yeah.
As you move into new markets, you need to be able to think, to your point, what are my trade-offs? What can I trade off? What can't I trade off? And so, for me, the learning was, through your work in the past, I have some perspective on how to do it, quote unquote, correctly. The context of the environment I was in would not allow me to do that. So pick your fights carefully.
Yeah.
To your point about clarity, make the decision and go and pursue it. Take the time to let it develop, because as you move into new markets, it does take time, 12, 18, 24 months. And from a people standpoint, I personally believe the success of a company is in its people. And so you have to put the right people in the right position and give them the right support if you're ultimately going to be successful.
Yep.
And so fighting to make sure that you have the right or the capability to do that is critical. So those are a couple points.
Well, and I think in your point about patience and letting something unfold, especially in a company of Ericsson's size, and just how long it takes in the enterprise, which you and I know, you're not taking a $15,000 solution and selling it through an inside salesperson that gets downloaded, that started with the freemium model. I mean, this is the other side of the spectrum. So having indicators and metrics that are not revenue and are not EPS to judge that you're charting the right direction. Any last minute insight or feedback you'd share with the audience?
Well, on those metrics, so things like, trials, proof of concepts, right? Demonstrating that you're getting traction, because the question is always, well, are you getting traction? If you're a revenue-based organization, revenue is a lagging indicator.
Yeah, it is. It's the ultimate lag, man.
But it's really where everybody, our CFO, that's all he cares about, and I get it, and I fully support him. But you need to think a little differently, and so those were some of the metrics. Proof of concepts, trials, customer briefings, bringing people, having the leadership team come to our corporate office and spend a day with us in a workshop to talk about how we work together. Those were some simple metrics that give us an indication of progress.
Perfect. So what Walt was talking about, and that was a fantastic answer, the concept of behavioral indicators. Walt rattled off 3 or 4 of those, meetings that were happening, proofs of concepts, right? Then that turns into pipeline, and then pipeline turns into bookings, and bookings turns into revenue, and then eventually you actually get some money in your bank account. So the point of me telling you that and having a little bit of fun and we're chuckling is you have to know what behavioral indicators you're going to pay attention to that tell you the activities of a Tuesday are going to benefit next quarter. And then you have to know as pipeline builds and eventually things are going to translate. So, Walt, can't thank you enough for swinging by the studio. Great to see you. You look fit as always. Walt is an incredible cyclist. He rides more in a week than most of us have in our lifetimes. So I guess if somebody else wants some advice of how to stay fit, they can also call you. But
Matt, he's not just a cyclist; he's a triathlete.
Yeah, I know.
An accomplished triathlete. I'm very impressed.
He makes us all feel really, really average. So, but good to see you, man.
Thank you very much. I really, really appreciate it. Thank
appreciate you coming by, and glad to see you thriving. You, our audience, you have a choice where you put your ears and your eyes every single week, and I appreciate your attention, and I appreciate your insight, and I appreciate your support on behalf of SBI and our firm. So I think, and with that being said, Melissa, I think you've got one more thing to share with the team.
I do, yes. And if you are new to the SBI podcast or the SBI experience, I encourage you to become a part of the SBI community. You can do that by going to salesbenchmarkindex.com/register. And there you can select your topics of interest and when you would like to receive content.
That's it for today, folks. As always, until next time, I wish you good luck as you try and make your number.
This has been the SBI Podcast. For more information on the studio, SBI's Executive Briefing Center, our team, or to schedule a workshop, please visit salesbenchmarkindex.com.